One secure call, 60 seconds of audio, and two careers went up in smoke. In a quiet Louisiana town where nothing ever happens, a black woman in jeans lifted a phone and the Pentagon lit up like a thunderstorm. They thought she was nobody. They were wrong. She was General Zara Whitfield. Before we dive in, if you love twisty, goosebump-heavy true-style stories that flip power on its head, tap subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a stand for dignity in the comments to join our community. Now let's begin. It was supposed to be a forgettable drive on a forgettable road. General Zara Whitfield had made trips like this 100 times. No motorcade, no aids, no fuss, just a rental car, a map in her head, and a deadline. Her next stop was Barksdale Air Force Base for a confidential briefing that couldn't wait. Between Lake Charles and Shreveport, the highway thinned, the sky got whiter, and the towns looked like they'd been set down and left in the sun to fade. Pine Hollow was one of those towns, a string of weathered storefronts, a single traffic light, and a gas station with a hand-painted sign that read Cobb's Fuel and Food. Zara wouldn't have noticed it if the signal bars on her secure phone hadn't died. 3 miles earlier, she needed a clean line, not in an hour, not when she arrived. Now, she pulled into the lot, choosing a spot at the far edge beneath a sun-faded billboard. The heat rose in shimmering waves off the cracked concrete. She wore an olive jacket over a gray tee, plain sneakers, a ball cap tugged low over her short twists. Nothing about her said 4-star general. That was by design. Power travels lighter when it doesn't advertise itself. Zara stepped out, opened the secure device, and spoke in the voice that had briefed presidents. General Whitfield verifying identity, initiating operational update. On the other end, Lieutenant Commander Owen Pike in the command center began reading insensitive movement timelines, real-time orders, and advisories that existed on a strictly need-to-know basis. Zara listened, eyes scanning the lot by habit. A few locals leaned against their pickups, talking in the syrupy, slow rhythm of summer. They glanced over, they looked again. She didn't fit their picture. She rarely did. Inside, behind the cashier's counter, Marlene Cobb's stringy blonde bun, pinched mouth. A lifetime of suspicion pressed into her forehead watched through the glass. Marlene didn't see the quiet precision of a decorated officer. Securing a line, she saw what she'd decided to see the moment Zara stepped out of the car. Trouble. An outsider. A challenge to the small, brittle world Marlene guarded by hoarding judgments like canned beans. She lifted the landline, dialed Pine Hollow PD, and kept her voice low. "Yeah, we got a suspicious woman out by the pumps. Won't go inside. Looks, hire something. Keeps muttering into some device. Better send someone quick." Across town, officers Brent Malloy and Casey Riker were clock-watching their way through a slow shift. Malloy was broad-shouldered and bored of rules. Riker was younger, edgy with the kind of energy that mistakes adrenaline for authority. The dispatch crackled. "Suspicious female. Cobb's Fuel and Food." Malloy smirked. Riker adjusted his belt like a gunslinger. Something to do. Someone to stop. Gravel spat from their tires as the cruiser fishtailed into the station. Red and blue strobes sliced across the windows. Zara lowered the phone half an inch, measured the situation in a heartbeat, and placed the device carefully. On the hood, hands visible, palms open. The oldest survival skill in America. "Good afternoon, officers," she said, calm as a metronome. "How can I help you? License and registration." Malloy snapped, already annoyed that she sounded composed. "Now, certainly," Zara said. "My ID is in my back pocket. I am General Zara Whitfield, active duty." "Unofficial," Riker barked, a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "General, out here? You're real funny." Zara drew the wallet, slowly, presented her military credentials and federal travel orders. Malloy barely glanced before flicking the ID onto the hood like trash. "Fake." Something small and old cracked in her chest, a sound she'd learned to swallow long ago. "Officer, you're making a serious mistake," she said evenly. "Please contact your supervisor." "Turn around," Malloy said, already fishing. "Out the cuffs, hands behind your back." Zara didn't resist. She stood in the heat of the afternoon, a woman trained to de-escalate a battlefield. calculating the minimal path through pointless danger. The cuffs bit into her wrists. Her secure device vibrated on the hood and skittered off, clattering to the ground still connected. In Washington, Owen Pike pressed a headset tighter, eyes widening at the surge of static and shouted voices that didn't belong. "General Whitfield, this is Command Ops," he said into the mic. "Do you copy, General?" "Respond." Silence. Then the crackle of breath and a scuffle and Malloy's voice. "Stop moving." Pike looked up at Colonel Talia Reyes, who was already crossing the ops floor with the clipped stride of someone built for crisis. "Ping her," Reyes said, "right now." A blinking dot leaped onto the Louisiana map, not Barksdale. A speck, labeled Pine Hollow. Reyes' jaw set like stone. "Notify Barksdale Security Forces. Loop in Jag. If she's in custody, we move." Back in the lot, people had started recording. Phones rose like a grove of pale rectangles. Harvesting proof. Marlene hovered at the door, arms folded, savoring the spectacle with a smile as thin as fishing line. "Name," Riker demanded, looming. "Real name. Who are you working for?" "You're holding the answer," Zara said. "On the hood. And on your radio," as if summoned. Riker's radio spit static and a dispatcher's clipped tone. "Unit 12, confirmed detainment." Malloy lifted the mic. "Affirmative. Female, 40s, refusing to." The voice returned, sharper. "Be advised, subject is federal flagged." "Repeat, federal flagged." "Pentagon initiated emergency contact. Release immediately and await further." "Instruction." The color drained from Riker's face. Malloy's mouth opened, closed. For a split second, the entire parking lot seemed to fold into silence. Keys fumbled. The cuffs clicked open, metal tattoos blooming red on Zara's wrists. Malloy mumbled something that tried to be "ma'am" and failed halfway out. Zara flexed her hands, lifted her gaze to meet theirs, and let the iron in her spine do the talking. "You will regret this today," she said quietly. "Not later, today." The words hadn't finished landing when a formation of black SUVs thundered into the lot. Doors swung open in practiced sequence. Barksdale's security forces poured out with precision that didn't look like a movie, because it was real. At their head was Lieutenant Colonel Amir Dorsey, face set, focus absolute. "General Whitfield, are you injured?" he asked as he reached her. "Minor abrasions," she said. "The real damage is to their judgment." Dorsey gave a slight nod and turned to the Pine Hollow officers. "Per federal directive, you will stand down pending investigation. Any further action risks obstruction." Malloy tried to recover his swagger. "We didn't know who you had lawful credentials in your hand," Dorsey said, voice low enough to be deadly. That was enough. Phones kept filming. No one blinked. And in every frame, there was the truth. A woman who'd commanded brigades being treated like a trespasser in her own country until the country remembered whose uniform she'd earned. They moved Zara into a vehicle as the convoy rolled away. She let herself glance back once. Riker stood small, like a child who'd been caught breaking a window he thought no one would miss. Marlene vanished into the shadowed doorway, as if the building might swallow her whole. The ride to Barksdale was quiet. Dorsey briefed her on what she already knew. Command Ops had scrambled, Jag was looped in, and the incident had tripped a federal wire that Pine Hollow would never escape. Zara stared at the blur of fields, a long breath rising, falling, smoothing, her pulse back into its familiar cadence. She was safe. That wasn't the point. By the time she finished her debrief, the internet had already finished what the cuffs started. A 23-second clip, no theatrics, no shouting. Just a calm voice identifying herself, and hands forced behind her back was everywhere. It struck like a tuning fork in the national chest. You didn't need commentary to understand it. You only needed eyes. The consequences built like a summer storm. Pine Hollow PD tried a press conference. Chief Doyle Mercer, who wore his hat like armor, sweating under lights he didn't control, read from a paper about misunderstandings and procedure. A reporter from Baton Rouge cut in. "Chief, why did your officers discard federal orders and military ID? Was race a factor?" Mercer fumbled an answer that landed like a dropped plate. The cameras didn't blink. Then came the follow-ups, internal complaints that had never seen sunshine. Training records that showed more range time than civil rights instruction. A pattern long invisible by design. Civil rights attorneys from New Orleans and D.C. filed federal complaints on Zara's behalf. The DOJ opened an investigation. The governor issued a statement calling the incident an insult to service, a failure of judgment, and a betrayal of public trust. And somewhere beneath the avalanche, Marlene Cobb's 911 call surfaced. The transcript didn't match the footage. The words on drugs had evaporated like dew under scrutiny. False report. Consequences. For all the noise, Zara kept her posture. She answered questions with the same steady cadence that had steadied soldiers in worse places than a gas station lot. But in the privacy of a base room, she caught her reflection, wrists faintly marked. Eyes steady but tired, and felt the old ache that even after medals and maps and years that took more than they gave, she could still be shrunk down to a stereotype that fit in someone else's fist. She decided the next words would be hers. They set a podium outside Barksdale's gates for noon on Saturday. The air hummed with heat and attention. Families stood with handmade signs, veterans in faded caps, students, reporters, skeptics, the curious, the angry, the hopeful. Zara walked out in full dress uniform, the ribbon summary of a life pinned to blue fabric. She didn't bring talking points, she brought truth. "My name is General Zara Whitfield," she began. "For 29 years I have served this country, led soldiers, and defended the very freedoms that make us who we claim to be." She let the quiet widen just enough. Yesterday in Pine Hollow, none of that mattered. I was not seen as a citizen or as an officer. I was measured against someone else's fear and found wanting by bias that mistook power for a threat and dignity for defiance. Pens scratched, cameras clicked. She wasn't speaking to them. "I am not here for an apology," she said. "Apologies without accountability are theater. I am here to insist on what every human being is owed: respect, law, dignity. These are not conditional. They are not negotiable. They are not things you get only when you look like you belong." Behind the cameras, a murmur grew and steadied, a sound that wasn't exactly applause yet, but was on its way there. "This is not the first time," she continued. "Not for me, not for many of you. But repetition doesn't make it acceptable. It makes it urgent, and urgency is a choice." She didn't grandstand. She didn't perform. She told the story clean, the way soldiers do when they send hard messages home. Then she ended it with a sentence that landed like a gavel. "I was not humiliated yesterday," Zara said. "They were, and history will record it that way." The applause started at the edges and rolled forward like shade. It built into something that felt less like noise and more like a vow. Pine Hollow's reckoning didn't wait for the news cycle to move on. Malloy and Riker were placed on leave before the sun set. They were terminated by the end of the week. Their names were entered into the state decertification registry, a quiet blacklist that means a badge won't happen again, not here, not next county over. Marlene Cobb was charged for a false report and fined heavily. A civil suit followed. The department signed a consent decree. De-escalation training mandated. Civil rights curriculum expanded. Stop and identify protocols rewritten. Outside monitors installed. Policy words, yes, but this time with teeth. Zara did not ask for a settlement. Her attorneys negotiated one anyway. She directed the funds to a scholarship for daughters of enlisted service members in Louisiana, women who would, like her, learn to walk into rooms that still didn't expect them and leave the doors open behind. She never spoke Malloy or Riker's names again. Some names aren't worth carrying. Weeks later, Owen Pike visited Barksdale for coffee and closure. He brought a printed transcript of the call that had blown the lid off a small town and reminded a larger one of what uniforms mean. In a neat box were the seconds that changed everything. Her voice identifying herself, the clatter of the phone hitting the ground, the dispatcher's urgent tone, the order to release. History can happen quickly. It still takes a long time to live through. "Ma'am," Pike said, "standing to go. I thought you should have the first clean copy." Zara thanked him, slid the envelope into a drawer, and went back to work. She still had missions to plan, soldiers to mentor, and the ordinary grind of duty that is anything but ordinary. When you remember why it matters, She did not wait for the world to change before she moved. She moved, and the world had to adjust. As for Pine Hollow, time didn't stop there. It rarely does. New officers joined women and men who'd read the report and decided to learn instead of defend their ignorance. A mural appeared on the side of Cobb's Fuel and Food after Marlene sold the business. It showed a woman in a cap, back turned, looking toward a road that ran off the wall and into the day. Someone had scrawled beneath it, "Respect isn't a courtesy, it's the law." Zara never went back to see it. She didn't need to. The lesson wasn't in paint, it was in policy, in paychecks, in who gets stopped and who gets waved through, in how a dispatcher's voice can carry accountability across cheap radios and long distances. And if you're still here, if your heart hammered when the cuffs clicked, if your throat tightened when she said, "Today remember this part most, injustice depends on silence." It withers under light, under documentation, under citizens who know the sound of dignity and refuse to mistake it for defiance. Your phone is a witness. Your voice is a lever. Your vote is a tool. Your courage is contagious. So when someone like Marlene reaches for a lie, when someone like Malloy or Riker reaches for power they didn't earn, reach for truth, say the name right, demand the protocol, ask for the supervisor, keep the camera steady, tell the story with the kind of clarity that leaves no room for a misunderstanding. Because one secure call can change a day, and one brave refusal to be small can change a town. If this story gave you goosebumps, share it with someone who needs reminding that dignity isn't negotiable. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. We've got more true style stories where justice doesn't just knock, it walks in.